Perfect. Welcome again to the January 2023 OSN Showcase. We are so excited to be talking about the T3 Innovation Networks and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation's work in the Competency Explorer and JobSIDE. And we've got two amazing guest speakers here today, Tyszko and Phil Barker. So we are really thrilled to be able to start the new year on a really exciting note with some really cool innovations and happenings within the skills ecosystem. And we're excited to have you join us. This is a great way to get past the quit date in January and make good on your resolution to dive into all that OSN has to offer and to really begin your work or continue your work or recruit a new person into this open skills mission and movement. And to really kick us off today, I want to turn things over now to Sarah DeMark, our executive director, to kind of just share some thoughts with you. So please, Sarah, take it away.
Oh, thanks, Christian. Yeah, I just want to echo just happy 2023. Really appreciate you all being here with us today, and really appreciate our speakers today. I think it's going to be a fantastic session, and I'm really excited to hear more about the progress and the amazing milestones that they are knocking out of the park. And so it'll be a great session. I will just mention we're going to shift this to a quarterly webinar series. We know that there's a lot of things competing for everybody's time these days. So really looking to shift that to quarterly. And if you have any suggestions on things that you want to hear more about in the future, absolutely let us know. We're always looking for feedback from our members. I will also just share like a quick milestone as we're kind of closing out, or I guess as we've closed out 2022. We have over 1,500 members now of the Open Skills Network in just a little over 2 years. So really excited to see the momentum and the progress, and really excited about the things we're going to be able to get done together this year. So with that, Christian, do I toss it back to you or?
Yep, I will take it back and I will move us forward so that we pause for a moment and with appreciation, really thank Walmart for their continued support and funding of all of the OSN activities, and in particular our showcase series. They have been a great supporter of the open skills movement, and we're really thankful for that. So now, let's talk about announcements. As you know, we have a presence on LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube, and we encourage you to come and follow us, engage with us, talk skills with us. And we really look forward to that. We want to be an active community in many different places, and these three are ones in particular that we hope to cultivate more in the new year. And now I want to turn things over for a moment to our community engagement manager, Christina Caldwell, to give us a fuller look on some different announcements happening in the OSN sphere.
Thank you, Christian. Welcome, everyone. The OSN has some exciting initiatives to announce. We will be launching the Community of Practice for Education and Employers next month. This community of practice is for educators and employers who want to incorporate a skills-based approach to learning and hiring within their organizations. And at the heart of this COP is a core stack of action-oriented tools and playbooks that address how to implement open skills, digital wallets, and the impact of open skills. Then we have the Open Skills Management Tool, also known as OSMIT Hackathon, happening in March. This event will have coders from all over coding against OSMIT. Some of the categories will include OSMIT bug fixes, enhancements, RSD data visualizations. So members, please stay tuned for more information on these two exciting initiatives. If you are not a member of OSN, visit the openskillsnetwork.org and sign up and join us. Thanks.
Fantastic. So now I'd like to bring up to our virtual stage two individuals who have been working a lot in the skills ecosystem and have been a part of OSN and have been sort of part of our founding core. And that is Tyszko from the U.S. Chamber Foundation and Phil Barker from CETUS LLP. Please welcome to the stage, and I'd like to turn this presentation now over to you two and let you take us on a journey. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you, and hello, everyone. I'm Jason Tyszko with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation, joined today by my colleague, Phil Barker, who is our OCN, or Open Competency Network, co-facilitator for the T3 Innovation Network. So we're going to be co-presenting today, and we actually have two presentations for you. The first presentation will be about the Competency Explorer, which is a project of the T3 Innovation Network. I'm going to provide some opening remarks, but Phil Barker is going to be our main presenter for that session. And once Phil finishes, we're going to pause and take any questions that the audience has, or any commentary that you'd like to contribute as part of today's session. Once we use up our time, we're going to then switch to the second presentation, where I'll be running point on a new effort from the U.S. Chamber Foundation called JobSIDE, which stands for Job Skills for In-Demand Employment. So two presentations for the price of one, but I'm going to get the first one started and then hand things off to Phil. So if we wouldn't mind going to the next slide. I want to provide a little bit of table setting regarding the T3 Innovation Network. I suspect many on this call are either participants in it or have heard of it, but some might not. So I'll endeavor to be concise, but wanted to provide the context for where this project lives. So the T3 Innovation Network's mission is to really enable the digital transformation of the talent marketplace. And how we do that is by bringing together stakeholders from different domains, whether it's the private sector and employers, those that are in the education, training, and credentialing business, or those on the government side of the equation. We want to bring those stakeholders together along with the technology vendors that serve them. And the idea behind this is by bringing together these different domains, we can talk more comprehensively about data interoperability. By bringing them together and the vendors that serve them, we think that's the key to advancing data interoperability for the talent marketplace. And why do we want this digital transformation and this interoperability? It is for three big goals: to make all learning count and to render that learning as data that could be transacted across these platforms and domains. Number two, to make competencies and skills like currency, which is more than a metaphor. We need to render them as data that can not only be transacted, but translated across platforms and domains. And then finally, what's it all for? We want to empower learners and workers with data. So that's what this network's all about. It is a collective action effort, bringing all of these different stakeholders. It promotes networking, collaboration, and partnerships, but it also hosts a variety of projects which have taken place over the years. If we go to the next slide, you can see that this journey began back in 2018, where the kind of founding members of the T3 network developed a roadmap towards data interoperability. And from 2019 to 2022, we had been sponsoring well over a dozen projects around implementing the roadmap, which included incubating data standards, hosting discussions on data standards adoption, on data collaboratives and data trusts. Lots of different moving parts, all under the T3 umbrella, each of those parts being led by different teams, organizations, or consultants. But these were areas where we realized we were better off working together rather than separate. It was going to take a network or community to solve these problems. It wasn't going to be solved by a single vendor or product. Where are we now? So after many years of successfully launching and completing projects and growing the T3 network, we are now in the kind of conclusion of our current phase, which we call the network of networks. And within this current phase, we kind of consolidated down to 4 core data infrastructure networks that you see here. We have one around data and technology standards, another around learning and employment records, one around jobs and workforce data, and then that second one is what brings us here today. We have an entire network dedicated to open competencies. It was formerly called the OCFC, for those who are familiar with that acronym, the Open Competency Frameworks Collaborative, but we've simplified and consolidated that name as well to the Open Competencies Network, which has as its kind of chief mission or product the development of what we have now branded the Competency Explorer. So just wanted to provide this context. This is where the project lives, where the network lives that is providing governance over the project. And to describe what this is all about, I am going to hand things over to my good friend, Phil Barker.
Thank you, Jason, for the introductions and for the welcome before that. If we move on to the next slide, I'll be talking about the Competency Explorer, which was at the time when we had the OCFC called the Search Service. So you may have heard of this as the OCFC Search Service. Before going into the what is the Competency Explorer and how does it work, I want to cover the why. Why do we need a Competency Explorer? And the first part to understanding that is to understand that when we talk about competency within the Open Competency Network and T3 as a whole, we understand that term broadly to include things like learning objectives, to include skills, to include competencies. And that is an important part of our efforts to try and link together the education to employment ecosystem. We want to be covering competencies as a way of covering both the learning objectives that are used in, say, competence-based education with skills that are used in skills-based hiring. And that education to employment ecosystem will be a lot easier to navigate and to analyze if the learning opportunities, the learning and employment records, the resumes, the job descriptions, the job posting adverts all reference the same competencies. And in order for them to reference the same competencies, we want people to be able to find and reference existing skill and competency descriptions wherever that is possible, rather than creating new ones from scratch. And if they do create a new one, we want them to be able to express a relationship between the new ones that they create and the existing skills, competencies that are already defined for other uses. And so for that to work, effective search and discovery needs to be ecosystem wide. And if we move on to the next slide, I start a series of diagrams which try to unpack the implication of what we mean by an ecosystem wide search. And we start off with search within a single silo. And sometimes the word silo is used in a pejorative way. I don't take it like that because silos are a good way of storing things in bulk. And besides, it's easier to say silo than each time to say repository stroke library stroke collection stroke database, whatever, of competency definitions. So please understand it in that way. And this slide attempts to represent 4 instances of a process that turns competency definitions into data or gathers that data in some other way and stores it in some system that allows the data to be searched, displayed, retrieved within the bounds of a single data silo. In all of the examples shown, the data happens to conform to some standards-based data model. And that's a good idea. It's not necessary when you're working within a single silo, but it's a good idea because it leads to interoperability. The data can be understood the data can be understood by more than just the system for which it was initially generated. And the next slide shows one way in which that interoperability can be exploited, because we have different silos using the same data standard. They are no longer isolated silos. The interoperability can be exploited to allow searching across data stores that have data based on the same underlying standard. A single interface can provide a search across several stores based on querying what values are in various data elements of the RSD or case or ASN standard that's used to describe the competencies, because you know the data are going to be homogeneous across the different data stores that use the same standard. And the standards shown in this example here are RSD and case. Others are available, ASN, CTDL, ASN, ESCO, several others. And these are all good standards with a user community or context for which they are sensible choices. And we don't assume that that is going to change. There are going to be various standards in use in the future. And search within homogeneous networks is bounded by the choice of standard. So that's where we move on to the next slide, which is an ecosystem-wide search, which is, you know, the challenge that we've set ourselves here. It needs to recognize that competency description data comes in all of these different data models. It needs to take data from systems that use RSD, CASE, ASN, and so on, and provide search and data exploration using data that conforms to all of these different data models, a sort of interoperability, but across different data standards. So that's the vision. And here's some of the technical and policy detail that's needed in order to get it to work. One of the technology tricks that we use in a couple of places is the idea of transcoding or transforming data. That is taking data expressed in one encoding model, for example, CTDL, ASN, and expressing it in another case. Supplying data to the Competency Explorer network for search involves transcoding or transforming it into the internal data schema that we have, which is a fairly minimal, stripped down set of properties that support the functionality that we aim to provide. We also offer the ability for end users, once they have discovered a competency framework that is useful for them, or individual competencies that they want to use, to receive the data for that competency framework using a variety of standards, not just the one in which the host data store uses. This builds on the theme of interoperability across data standards, and this general idea of data transcoding and transformation is one of the reasons why T3 as a whole is also supporting projects for mapping between different data standards. The next slide builds on one of the policy and governance areas that we are aware we need to deal with, that of trust when you're sharing data. One of the nice things about a silo is that if you control the silo, you control access to the data in the silo. Once you start allowing services that are not tied to your silo to access the data, you need to trust them. Trust them not to misuse that data or use that data in some way that you would be detrimental perhaps to your business model that keeps your ability to provide the data in the first place. So one important aspect of the Competency Explorer and the OCN as a whole is the trust network. We call the various services that connect to the network nodes. They can supply data, search for data, provide access to data, and potentially do other things. We have different types of node for different types of functionality. And there's a lot of detail involved in this. In the trust aspect of this especially. I'm going to gloss over it. I'll just say that we distinguish between the rights that other members of the network will need in order for the network to function. That is the rights that you need to provide to other nodes within the network. We distinguish between those rights and the rights that are granted to the end beneficiaries. That is the people who are using the Competency Explorer as a whole to find competency data. The next slide, I look at some more technical details, and I'm not going to do a deep dive into the technical architecture or anything technical. I just hope to give enough detail to indicate what sort of technical resources are required to set up a node. The network is currently built using Amazon Web Services and Elasticsearch for the search part, and sharing through several different data buckets. Though other infrastructure can be used for the nodes, what's important is the API, the application programming interface that's used to access the data. It could be set up on other technologies other than Amazon Web Services, but that's what we've implemented so far, and that's what we have the best support for. To set up a node, you need to set up your own request a node agent, provide a node agent, and a node directory in which you store your data, and you plug these into the trusted shared layer, which is the middle layer of the cake, so that they can be accessed by other nodes within the network. And we can provide some help with setting up a node in this way. One important thing to realize, especially when you're looking at some of the examples that we demonstrate, is that each node can be configured by the organization running it to meet their needs. For example, to provide the user interface that they want. The work that we're doing at the moment is quite focused on the underlying data, and so the interfaces that we have at the moment are pretty data oriented. They give you, they're designed to show you what data is available, which isn't always the prettiest way of displaying things, and it definitely doesn't give you the best user experience. So this configuration of a node to meet your own needs will involve creating a user interface that gives the sort of experience that you want your users to have. If we move on to the next slide, covers the sort of features and functionality that we have within the Competency Explorer. And how we developed this was what was the requirements work group for skills and competencies, which is one of the groups that we have within the Open Competency Network, generated a list of things that they wanted to be able to do with the Competency Explorer. From that, the technical advisory work group, part of the Open Competency Network, derived a list of what we call desired features, sort of technical features that need to be implemented by the Competency Explorer software. So the functionality is ultimately derived from community needs rather than the technical side. We have a project at the moment which is extending the technology that we have to implement as many of the desired features as we can, and to explore the barriers to implementing the others so that hopefully we can progress with them at a later date. We're taking what we call an agile approach to this development, so we sort of learn lessons as we go along and we build on those lessons. Would it be possible to go on to that example search that's linked from the bottom of this slide?
Yeah, let me just swap out. All right. So that is the link.
Okay, so I'm not sure how easy it is to see what's happening there. We will share the slides after the presentation, so you will be able to have a look at this. Please, whenever you look at this, bear in mind the caveats I gave about this being a technology demonstrator, not a pretty interface. What you can see here, hopefully, is the result of a search which was looking across two different facets. It was searching for frameworks that deal with aerospace. So the framework description will or title will mention aerospace, and the competencies within that will mention test. And it shows a number of different competencies that have been found. The other thing to bear in mind with the pilot is that we're working off a fairly slim amount of data. There's not a huge amount of data, so not many searches are going to surface very many competencies. You know, we know there are a lot more relevant competencies out there. And you see at the top there is a link to the framework itself. If you click on most of the links here, what you'll get is a very data-oriented view of the competency description, for example. But you click on that top link and you'll get what is a slightly prettier view of the competency framework information with a expandable list of all of the competencies within that framework and a description of the framework as a whole. And on the right-hand side was the option to download the framework, and that download is where you can download it either in CTD-LASN, which is its native format, if you like, the format that the data was provided in, or you get the option to transform it into other models. So if you want the data in case, there will be a transformation done in the background and the data will be delivered to you in case. If we move back to the presentation, please.
Absolutely. And just so everybody knows too, I have also placed the link to what we were looking at into the chat as well, because I know that there was some, it was a little hard to see.
Thank you, Christian. And I didn't consider all of the complications of displaying both presentations and web pages before landing you with the task of driving my demonstration.
Not a problem. And then there were two other links from other slides. I've also placed those into the chats. And as both Jason and Phil mentioned, we will send out an email to all of the attendees today with the presentation and the links as well.
Okay. Two final slides just to cover quickly. The next slide is what we would like for next steps. We invite you to participate in the competency the Open Competency Network. We have meetings on Wednesdays at noon Eastern time covering different aspects, policy, technical outreach, project specific stuff on different weeks of the month, but always at noon on a Wednesday Eastern. We'd love to see AusMet instances linked to the Explorer network, and not just AusMet, but anybody interested in setting up a node, please contact us. And the next slide gives you the details of how to contact us through the T3 Network Hub, where you can find more about the Competency Explorer and other T3 networks. And you can also join any of the T3 networks that you want, including the Open Competency Explorer, and access other information about outputs of the network. Apologies if I overran a little bit there. That is all that I had to say. I would welcome questions about what I covered.
Thank you so much, Phil.
Go ahead, Christian.
Oh, no, I was just going to say thank you so much. And I know that Jason has been answering some of the questions in the chat. But if you do have additional questions, please do throw them into the chat. And I'm going to turn it over to Christina now. She is going to help us facilitate a short little Q&A here to kind of really reflect on what Phil has shared with us.
Yeah, thank you, Christian. So for your system architect slide, and let me go up further. Essie asked, let me get up there really quick. Give me just 1 second to find that question. So Essie asked a question, and I will actually go to Dan C first. He had a question. Will the Explorer make use of AI?
Depends what you mean by will. We did have a set of discussions around the potential uses of AI in things like matching between different competencies, or we spoke about the possibility of extracting competencies from documents that were written for humans and expressing them as standards compliant descriptions. But those were discussions around scoping future projects. The Explorer at the moment doesn't make use of AI.
Okay, thank you. And Essie asked, does this act essentially as a skill sensing network on the data tool side? And that was your system architect slide as well.
I'm not sure what you mean
on
by
that one, Phil.
skill
I didn't understand it
sensing.
myself.
Sorry, I'm not sure what you mean by skill sensing. It's
Maybe whoever submitted that, if they could clarify their question in the chat, that might help us. And in the meantime, Christiana, maybe we can take another question.
All right. And Mark asked the question, will the viewer and possibly even a competency editor be available for authoring organizations to take up?
That's not on our roadmap. We're largely dealing with competency data that already exists. I believe there are several good tools for authoring competency data already.
All right, and I don't see a follow-up question or clarification from SE as of yet. I believe those were all of the questions in the chat for you, Phil.
Christina, can we get to the question that Don posed towards the end? It just came in.
Okay, yes.
And then I've got one too that I can raise.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you.
I see Don's.
Yeah, so does this mean that you don't have a care what standard to choose when starting to build a collection or framework as long as you choose one?
I wouldn't phrase it quite like that. Different standards have different strengths and weaknesses and are suitable for different purposes within different communities. So that's what you need to care about. We are, in terms of taking data, we are neutral across all the standards. We don't take a view on which ones are better for what. The data transformation part is something that needs to be done for each different standard, and we have it in place for some standards, but not for every single standard that exists.
Thank you. And we do have the follow-up from SE. Gartner recommends a model working with stakeholders, sourcing emerging skills informally through conversations. But what I see is that you're evaluating the data from emerging info.
Okay. Yes, that's true. You need to work with when you're selecting the skill. You need to work with partners to make sure that you select the right frameworks or the right skills to use. But before you get to the selection stage, you need to discover what's available. And that's what we're focusing on, the ability to discover skill descriptions that are available and to explore the context around those descriptions, which then helps inform the selection process.
Thank you. And Nate Otto
Perfect.
had a quick question. Is there an active API that developers can use to search via software demos today? Or is the search interface in HTML the only way to access competency data from the software?
It's all API. It's the API that matters. Yes, there is an active API, and the nodes. When I said that the technology stack that you use to develop a node doesn't matter too much, what that boils down to is you can develop what you want so long as it interacts through the API.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Phil. And Christian?
Perfect.
You had a question?
Thank you. No, we're going to transition over to our second presentation, and we're going to unleash Phil into the chat, where he can handle each one of these questions as he so chooses. And please do continue to put your questions into the chat. Anything we don't kind of cover today, we can always send on to our presenters and kind of facilitate some bridge work there. But now we want to move on to our second presentation, JobSIDE. Please, Jason.
Christian and Christina, thank you for your help with navigating the Q&A. And Phil, thank you for co-presenting on the Competency Explorer. I do want to just, I try to keep things simple for folks. I'm not a technical person. I had to get technical to be able to hang out with people like Phil. But I like to come up with simple metaphors. And when it comes to the work that the Competency Explorer is engaging in, it's the power of search. And what we saw as a need in the larger digital transformation is if there is going to be competency and skills data hosted by many different organizations, end users like me need to be able to easily search across them without having to visit every one of them. So that is what that project solves for on behalf of the ecosystem. So visit one library, you can search all libraries. It could be a very beautiful thing. So we look forward to launching it, and we think there could be very strategic partnerships established with OSN, its members, and specifically instances of OSMIT. So we hope this year we can pursue those opportunities with you all. But now we're going to switch to a second effort called JobSIDE. This is not a T3 Innovation Network project, but it is using innovations that have come out of the T3 Innovation Network. But I'm going to tell a little bit of a different story, and I'll try to move quickly in the interest of time so we can get to the Q&A. So I'm going to compress, but the origins of this project actually come from another Chamber Foundation initiative called TPM, or Talent Pipeline Management. And this is actually our largest workforce initiative. It's in 45 states in Canada. We have hundreds of active employer collaboratives that are using this system, and they involve thousands of companies. But this is essentially a change management initiative where we have leveraged lessons learned, tools, strategies, and methodologies from supply chain management and have applied them for solving workforce challenges. And the goal here was to fundamentally change the role employers play in these career pathway partnerships and to move them largely from an advisory role to an end customer role of what we call a talent supply chain. That does not imply that a school is a factory or a person is a widget. This is a way of taking best practices and continuous improvement strategies that are well established in the private sector and now applying them in new and innovative ways to change how employers effectively engage, share information, and source talent from preferred education, training, and credentialing providers. So that's what it is. It's a framework. If we go to the next slide, you'll actually see the framework, which is a 6-strategy approach that is taught through our curriculum, or is embedded in our curriculum that is taught through our TPM Academy. We run these academies with national cohorts. We have a global cohort going on right now. We're about to launch. We do state-based cohorts, municipal-based cohorts. There's no wrong way to deliver an academy, but we train organizations and employers up on how to be operators of high-performing talent supply chains. So think of it this way. We trained up the Phoenix Chamber of Commerce. They learned how to be operators of talent supply chains. They launched now 5 employer collaboratives. Their reach is well over 100 companies, and they are actively providing talent supply chains for the greater Phoenix area, delivering so much value that many of those companies are paying dues to sustain that service. So that's TPM in a nutshell, but I want to draw your attention right now to that purple box, which is strategy 3 of TPM. And it's about how employers align and communicate their job requirements. And this is a really critical step when it comes to talent supply chain management, because you got to get things right, like the numbers and where they're going, the volume of demand, but you also have to get right the specifications. So what would be the product spec, or in this case, the qualifications for the job opportunity. So we bring employers together to really refine how they're organizing their hiring requirements, because believe it or not, they may need some work. A lot of us start with job descriptions or postings that are actually very poorly written. And once poorly written, they're raising they have all kinds of unintended consequences in terms of creating barriers for people applying, having too many people apply, making for a longer and more costly hiring process. Lots of different things can go wrong if you don't get the specifications right. So we spend a lot of time in TPM working with employers to get them to do job analysis and to produce better job descriptions and postings that are more skills-based and are better fit for that opportunity. So we're streamlining the talent sourcing and hiring process. We're also trying to right-size those requirements because your education and training partners don't want to be teaching things that are unnecessary for the job or that are over-engineered for the job. But this is a way of creating optimization across the talent supply chain, but you got to get the hiring requirements right. And by that, I mean essentially the skills. So if you go to the next slide, I wanted to point out that we've been doing this for a long time, but some problems have emerged along the way, or maybe not problems is the right word, but some challenges have come up. And while TPM works, this part of the process can be very laborious, especially if you're working with a large number of companies, let's say 12 or more. They would need to compile all their job descriptions and postings together, along with any relevant industry frameworks, to create something like a master competency list that could be used for job analysis purposes. So it's a lot of spreadsheet work, it's a lot of data entry, and then to have one company, let alone a dozen or more companies, do the job analysis and compile the results. Lots of steps in that process. It takes time, it takes focus, and things could potentially go wrong, or there's points of failure along the way. So one of the things we've been waiting for, given the work that T3 has been engaged in, is our technology innovations emerging, our data standards emerging that could really enable companies to do this faster and more effectively. And can we use it in such a way that companies, employers, can become better users of skill frameworks in their job descriptions and postings? Another thing we've been trying to solve for is there's a potential point of failure between what an employer is organizing in terms of their hiring requirements and what they communicate to their education and training partners. The point of failure could be where it actually ends up in the HRIS, the Human Resource Information System. So a lot of times a conversation could be had with a preferred education partner, and then all of a sudden when the job posting goes out, it has different information than what's been shared in the other conversation. So potential points of failure that need to be ironed out. A very time-consuming, tedious process if you're working with a large number of employers. How can technology make this workflow easier? So if you go to the next slide, you can see our solution, which is what we call JobSIDE, which stands for Job Skills for In-Demand Employment. And what JobSIDE is a collections of tools and applications that are designed to produce, share, and use data on jobs and skills. Not just any data on jobs and skills, employer valid data on jobs and skills. And that's what TPM brings to the table, the employer validation of jobs and skills. It comes from them. We want to make sure this information is easy to access and use, not only by employers themselves, but by education and training partners that need that information to create alignment opportunities for their learners. We also want to make sure, like I mentioned, that employers are becoming better users of competency and skill frameworks, and we create more harmonization around how they're describing critical job opportunities. And we also want to make sure that data can easily be ingested by their HR systems for use in posting a job description, or for organizing a job description or posting a job opportunity. Another thing we want to do is not just make sure the data is available, this employer validated skills data for critical jobs, but we want to make it easier for education and training partners to align to those skills. So in addition, we will develop a mapping tool as part of this that will allow you to easily pull in that employer validated skill profile and crosswalk it to a curriculum, to a credential, to an assessment, or even one day a learner's record itself. It's a mapping exercise that's supported in our TPM movement. But again, a very manual process where we have to create spreadsheets, populate them. We want an easy button, and we think JobSIDE helps us get there, at least in part. So how can we easily bring these data sets together and effectively do competency and curriculum mapping so we can show alignment to all the partners that are there. The last thing I wanted to point out as part of the solution set is provenance data. We not only want to know what are the validated jobs and skills, but we also want to know where did those employers get them from? Did they author them themselves? Did some of those skills that ended up in their profile come from another employer's profile? And if so, where did they get it from? So imagine, if you will, we pull up the Greater Phoenix Chamber's skill profile for a cybersecurity position. And we noticed that 5 of those skills came from another profile that was authored by the Buffalo Niagara Partnership. And when we go to the Buffalo, we trace it back further, we find out that 3 of those 5 skills that the Buffalo Niagara Partnership published came from the NIST framework. However, 2 of them they edited, and we want to know how. So if you're tracking what I'm doing here, we want to follow the provenance of how employers are users and consumers and publishers of skills, if they're borrowing from each other, if they're taking from frameworks, and if they're changing them. So one day we could go back to framework owners like NIST's NICE framework for cybersecurity and say, here's how our employers are using your framework to describe their most critical jobs, and here's what they're using but changing. So we think this can be a critical feedback loop to framework owners so they can see how in an open marketplace, employers are actually using those skills to describe their job opportunities and to hopefully then be using in their job postings. So we're trying to tie it all together through technology, but it's combining the TPM workflow process with the JobSIDE tool set that's making use of many T3 innovations. I also want to say that this is not an exclusive tool to TPM, but it is also going to be designed to support non-TPM employers, because some of them don't need the entire talent supply chain methodology. Some of them just might want to be better publishers and users of skills data. And it could be as simple as that. If we go to the next slide, what you will see is a basic diagram. Don't feel like you need to read all of this, but this is kind of a conceptual visual of how these tools work together. And there's different applications that are driving different parts of the overall value proposition, but I could just quickly run through them. If you follow the numbers 1 through 6, the first tool is going to allow employers to easily combine structured and non-structured data, whether it's coming from competency frameworks or other skill profiles, to produce a deduplicated master competency list. Make it really easy for them to merge the data. Why is that important? If we do that fast, we could then use that structured data to do job analysis, the employer validation. Once that validation is complete, we use the publishing tool that will actually publish it as a standards-based, skills-based, employer-validated profile that is hosted in number 3 above the library. That library, if you go over to number 6, is connected to Competency Explorer. And I should clarify that it will be connected to Competency Explorer. We plan to be part of the launch of it, or shortly after its launch. So we want to make sure anybody who's adopted the Competency Explorer protocol can easily search and find skill profiles in JobSIDE. Vice versa, if you notice that little diagonal arrow going between 3 and 1, we want to make sure that if an employer is producing a master competency list to use in job analysis, that they could easily pull frameworks that other employers have created in the library, but also easily search the Competency Explorer network to find frameworks that they might also want to use. Imagine now Phoenix coming in, pulling the Buffalo Niagara Partnerships or Chambers profile because they're going to pick, borrow, and steal from them, but also searching Competency Explorer and finding skill libraries in OSMIT that they might want to use. So we're trying to make it really easy for them to grab what skills data they want so they could do the validation, and after they publish, to know where they got it from and to make sure people could easily find it. And on the right-hand column there, where you have 4 and 5, that's where we want to make sure we're pushing, or I shouldn't say pushing, but easily grabbing data out of that library to do at least 2 things. Number 1, populate a job posting. So make it ingestible by an HR system. So what they're putting in the library is consistent with what they're putting in the job posting, and reduce that point of failure. And then lastly, make sure that they can grab that profile to easily do a mapping exercise with education and training partners who have learning outcomes data that they want to show relates to what's inside the job. So again, I encourage you to kind of go through this at your own pace, but it's a collection of functionalities that produces the JobSIDE tool, or that makes up the JobSIDE tool. So in terms of next steps, we are building this now. We will be doing MVP testing this year, but we are going to be doing a lot more testing next year once we actually have a lot of the kinks worked out. I mentioned our plan is to adopt the Competency Explorer. So we're going to put up or shut up on the chamber side. We're going to get in on this. And we want to make sure that it can interface with instances of OSMIT should those instances also adopt the protocol. We want to demonstrate what that can look like and make employers better users of OSMIT skills. Our ask is we want to make sure members of OSN join the Competency Explorer network, which Phil covered, specifically at least one instance that we can test with. And we also encourage anybody who's part of the larger OSN network who has learning outcome data or competency data that they want to either have usable by employers or that they want to crosswalk with some of these skill profiles. We encourage you to participate in the pilot. There's many different ways to do it. You're able to learn more at our website. We provide the link here. Again, this deck will be made available to you, so you'll be able to access that. We are doing some updates to the website, so you'll probably see some more and better information in about a few weeks. And if we go to the final slide, I think we just have our contact information. So this is how you could reach both Phil and I. And we thank you for your time. We thank the OSN team for providing us with this opportunity to share not only these projects, but potential collaboration opportunities with members of the network. And I also want to acknowledge those who have made this work possible. T3 network has been around for a while, and it's enjoyed the partnership with many different funders, but currently we are supported by both Walmart and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So we deeply appreciate their support for making Competency Explorer possible. And then for JobSIDE, this is a new initiative, and it is supported by the Charles Koch Foundation. So we appreciate their support so we could bring this tool set to the ecosystem. I believe we have a few minutes before the OSN team needs to close. Hopefully some questions have come in and maybe some have been answered, but I will pass things over to Christina to play referee until our time expires.
Thank you, Jason. We do have some questions. Alec asked, how is this different from Skills Engine Calibrate?
I believe that is the tool that Michael Bettersworth is engaging in. We'd have to have a probably more nuanced conversation about those differences, but what we are focusing on in JobSIDE is the employer production and validation of the skills. So I believe I did have a conversation with Michael in a separate initiative that we have called Talent Finance, where we did have some conversation. We saw some synergies. So I think we'd have to get back to you with a more concrete answer, but not duplicative, complementary is what I would suggest.
Thank you. John asked, if I recall correctly, LearnCard is also looking to build a mapping tool for learning outcomes and job skills. Not sure if you guys are partnering, but if not, perhaps worth a conversation?
I'm not familiar with that tool. If there's any way you can share information with me directly or introduce me to someone, yeah, I mean, it could be that we want to at least demonstrate that this data could be put to work. But if others have applications that we can share our data with and they could do it as good, if not better, we are totally agnostic. We're not trying to be in the vendor business. This is all out of our foundation side. We have a social impact mission, and we want our stuff to be as readily available and as freely available as possible. And if we can better power, enable, and do demand aggregation for existing products and vendors, we're all about it. So it could be that we just need to build an API so we can share data with them. So we'd love to find out more. And if you know of others beyond them, we'd love to bring them to the table so they could put our data to work.
Great, thank you. Dan Cathers asked, what HR tech vendors, i.e. Workday, ADP, UKG, etc., are collaborating with this effort?
So I want to say none right now, but what I mean by that is this is just getting underway. We're just getting started. Through our TPM network, our partners all across the country are working with those vendors. So we will work through the TPM movement to integrate these tools into the other tools that they have. And I think we're going to find many opportunities for integration with those HR vendors. We will be engaging them as we develop the API to move data from the library to those HR systems. So we will have a list of folks we're working with as we develop the MVP this year. I just couldn't name any right now. We do work very closely with many of them also through our JetX initiative, which some of you might know, the Jobs and Employment Data Exchange, which is all about HR systems adopting data standards for jobs and for the incumbent workers in those jobs. So they're already at the table. We're just talking about different things, but data standards is very much part of our conversations when we do engage with them. And we're looking forward to bringing this opportunity to them. If they're talking to us about JetX, which is a far more sophisticated standardization movement, JobSIDE should be a walk in the park.
Thank you. Don Present asked, to what extent are JobSIDE frameworks openly licensable?
So how we're approaching this, let me back up a little bit. So currently in TPM, we have some basic web tools that allow them that enable them to do job analysis and organize survey data across employers to see variation across level of importance of skill. A lot of cool stuff in there. But once they're actually done doing that, it's kind of behind a firewall. And we kind of let them set the privacy rules around if they want to share it with peers or not. It's just not very efficient or effective. And it's hard for folks to find stuff. What we're trying to test with JobSIDE is we're trying to force the issue and say, look, we'll give you tons of choice in terms of what you use to publish a profile and how you go about doing it. But if you're publishing, it has to be public. So we want that information publicly available. The test is, will employers do it? We have seen it happen in TPM, but to build a tool to enable that at scale, we're going to see how they react to that. So we feel encouraged, but we are going to test this and see how employers react. But the idea is if it's in the library, It is openly available to anyone who wants to go in and search for it.
Great, thank you. We have several more questions. In the interest of time, I'll read off one more question, and then for the other questions, we can definitely get those answered offline. So Don's second part of his question is Creative Commons in the DNA, or is it more complex with proprietary and open data?
Yes, when we at the Chamber Foundation are behind the production of materials, we typically bake Creative Commons into the DNA. However, this is where we get to a Phil Barker question now. There is a spirited discussion happening within the Open Competency Network, which is the governance body for Competency Explorer, about when nodes sign up, what exactly is searchable. Does everything have to be open? Will proprietary data be available that can only be accessed by going through a firewall, or is it some kind of combination? We want JobSIDE to be totally open in terms of search and use. But once we adopt that Competency Explorer protocol, we're going to need to follow the governance guidelines set forth there about how you access and use data across certain nodes. But Phil, did you want to chime in on that?
I think you covered it very well. Just to reiterate that we draw a distinction between the data that's shared within the trust network to other nodes and the data that might be available from the originating source. They might have different licenses.
Yeah, so so this is something we've been testing for a long time in conversations with it started with JDX and now JetX. It's going to happen in JobSIDE, it's happening in T3. But what we're trying to do on the chamber side is really move the business community writ large into a space where they are using and producing and sharing open data about competencies and skills. And for a lot of folks, they're still in the old way of thinking, which is it's all proprietary behind a firewall, don't share it. But we have seen through TPM and other movements, if you facilitate change management, they are more able and better able and more likely to use these kinds of tools and to share data. It's a process. I like to say it's a human problem and a technology problem. JobSIDE as a tool does not alone solve for that problem statement, but by working with TPM and just working with employers at large, we think we can move them into this digital transformation and make them better users and as well as enable them to better share data about employer validated jobs and skills. And that's really the big value proposition we're offering this community and others, is the employer validation piece. We think this tool can deliver on that, and we look forward to demonstrating it for you or to you later this year.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jason, and thank you, Phil. I will turn it over to Christian to close us out.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And truly to Phil and to Jason, thank you again for your informative and thoughtful presentation. This is a fantastic way to start the new year, and we so appreciate all of our audience members for spending an hour with us on a Thursday talking about skills and these amazing new developments. So thank you everyone so much. Please do go and visit the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation's T3 Innovation Network. We will be sending out the presentation slide deck as well as the links to everyone. So please do dive in, send Jason and Phil a shout out, and let's keep the conversation going. Until next time, thank you all so much. Have a great day.